What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Heath Mullikin Project, the podcast where we're helping you discover your purpose, your passion, and your possibilities. Real quick, I'm going back through all my old episodes. This podcast started December 31st, 2018 as a daily journal. I had really struggled. I'd started a bunch of different podcasts and none of them really gained any traction. And so I thought, you know what? There's a lot going on in our life. This podcast will be a way to communicate with people what's going on every day in our lives. And the goal was for it to be a daily podcast. And it was for the first month or so. And never in my wildest dreams, when I started that podcast December 31st, 2018, that within 3 weeks, my wife would be dead. Like that was not even on my radar. So I'm going back through, let's talk a little podcast technicality. So I typically use a service called Blueberry to host my audio. And then I use a website built on WordPress. They have a Blueberry plugin. So the process was I had to record my podcast. I had to edit it. I had to upload it onto Blueberry, and you can do that through WordPress. So I have to go on my website, upload the audio, and publish it. And it was a bunch of steps, and that's why I started using the Anchor app. Super simple. So the problem with that is there's a lot of my episodes that are still hosted on Blueberry that I'm in the process of downloading and moving over to Anchor. And in the process of doing that, I am going back and I'm going to separate certain episodes into certain seasons. So this episode that I'm recording, these episodes where I'm going through the 21 indispensable qualities of a leader, they will end up being a season together. So 21 episodes, that'll be a season. So I'm excited. As I was working on some of this last night, I'm really excited to go back through it and listen to some of that audio. I mean, I'm very glad that I did that I captured the journey. Like the morning after my wife passed away, I recorded a podcast, and to capture that real and raw emotion, I'm glad that I did that. It's not just words on paper; it's my voice. So. That's been very therapeutic to go back through that. But I would encourage, like I said, I'm gonna break those up. So the first season is gonna be kind of that journey from December 31st to my wife's funeral. Then season 2 will be kind of that period after the funeral. And because of the way I was doing it, I think I've been much more consistent since I started using the Anchor app, because it is so easy to use. And so if you're thinking about starting a podcast in 2021, highly recommend the Anchor app. It's very easy to use. And if you got any questions, you need any help, I'll absolutely be willing to help you. I think the thing with podcasting is you got to remove all the barriers. You don't need fancy equipment. You just really need something to talk about. And even, listen, I encourage you to use Anchor and podcast just as a daily journal, just to work through some of the junk that's in your head. That's what I encourage you to do. So let's jump in to, we did character, we did charisma, we looked at commitment, and today we're going to look at communication. Communication being a quality that a leader needs to have. It's an indispensable quality, as John Maxwell would write. So it's always amazing to me that essentially, being a pastor for 20 plus years, I am a professional communicator. I've recorded hundreds of, maybe if you combine all the podcasts I've been on, I'd be interested to see how close I am to 1,000. That might be some good research to do. But I'm a professional communicator, and yet I have trouble communicating sometimes. Sometimes the synapses aren't firing in my brain, and I get ADD and I get ahead of myself and I get the the parts of the story in the wrong order, and I just have trouble. Communicating. Here's what John Maxwell says about communication. Educators take something simple and make it complicated. Communicators take something complicated and make it simple. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good thought. So let's look at 4 truths that John Maxwell says about communication. So 4 truths, and then we're going to look at ways to improve your communication. Now, you may be listening to this. It doesn't matter what you do in life. You may not be the boss at your job, but whatever you do, you're a leader. If you're a parent, you got to be able to communicate with your kids. If you're a spouse, you got to be able to communicate with your spouse. If you're dating, oh my goodness, you got to be able to communicate. You got to learn how to communicate now. Because if you can't communicate in your marriage, it's not going to be a very happy marriage. It may not be a very long marriage if you're not able to communicate. So here's 4 basic truths about communication. Number 1, you need to simplify your message. There's a story about a young man who was going to give his first speaking engagement, and he went to his mentor and said, "Hey, what do I need to, what kind of advice can you give me about giving a really good speech?" And this is what he said: "Write an exciting opening that will grab everybody in your audience. Then you write a dramatic summary and closing that will make the people want to act. Then put them as close together as possible." That is really, really good. John Maxwell quotes Napoleon Bonaparte, something he used to tell his secretaries: be clear, be clear, be clear. So no matter what you're trying to communicate, you're trying to communicate something to your kids, you're trying to tell your spouse something, you're trying to give a presentation, you got to be clear. You got to simplify your message. Number 2, you have to see the person. If you want to become a better communicator, become audience-oriented. I think this has been one of my biggest weaknesses as a speaker, is I have been so excited, especially in preaching. I've been so excited, you learn something new in the scriptures and you're so excited to share it that you don't take the time to think about, okay, this is how I learned this information, and this is how this information impacted me, but how does this audience need to hear this information? They may not need to hear it or receive it the way that I did. And so you have to really think about your audience, and I think sometimes I've preached to teenagers in a way that was more suited toward adults. There's been times I've spoken to adults and it was more suited for a teenage audience. And there's been some times that I've spoken, it wasn't fit for any audience. And I think there's sometimes that I've spoken and it was just for me. I don't know that anyone else got any good out of it, but it was impactful for me. But you have to kind of put yourself in your audience's shoes. Number 3, show the truth. First, you need to believe in what you say. And when you are fired up, okay, when you're fired up about what you're saying and you really believe it, Field Marshal Ferdinand Fox said, "The most powerful weapon on earth is the human soul on fire." You got to feel what you're saying. And then secondly, you got to live what you say. So it's 2 things. Like when people hear you speaking, they have to believe that you believe what you're saying. And they have to have seen that lived out in your life. It's hard sometimes as a pastor, because I think there's this misconception that, the pastor's got it all together. There's been, I would say, more times than not, 75, 80%, I'm preaching on something that I haven't figured out yet. I'm even this podcast, I'm speaking on things that I am in the process of implementing, of trying to live out what I'm fired up about. But when the truth of what you're saying meets the truth of how that has impacted your life, that's a powerful thing, because that connects with the audience. When an audience sees and feels and experiences that you have truly been transformed by the message that you're sharing, by the power of that message, that's when you got them. That's when the magic happens. And every time you speak, it's not going to be the Super Bowl. Sometimes when you speak, it might be week 14 of the NFL regular season when your team is out of playoff contention. But you still got to make it count. You still got to do your best. And then now I'm speaking from the context of, as a pastor, I was speaking every single week. And there's an ebb and flow when you're speaking on a regular basis. If you're just going around and you're speaking, here and there, but even outside of that, even outside of speaking from a stage, when you're just communicating with people, like when I'm talking to my kids, they need to feel what I'm saying, and they need to know if I'm asking them to do something that I'm willing to do it myself. Here's the fourth thing: is seek a response. As you communicate, never forget that the goal of all communication is action. I think, when I was a kid growing up in church, we had an altar call every week. And I grew up Baptist, loved the Baptist church, changed my life. But it felt like a lot of times it didn't matter what the preacher preached on. The altar call is going to be the same. Do you need to get saved? Do you need to rededicate your life? Are you called into full-time service, full-time Christian service? Like, those are the three things. Like, you could preach on sexual purity in your message, and then your altar call is going to be... Now, one thing I always try to do, if I'm speaking at a youth camp, I'm gearing every night. Every night is a specific message, and every night there's a specific challenge. There's a specific call, and there's been nights at camps that I have spoken on sexual purity. And so the response is, hey, do you want to commit yourself to sexual purity? Those kind of things. When you're talking to your kids, what's the desired response? This is where I miss the mark a lot. I don't get the desired response. And I think that's a fine balance you have to learn as a parent, is how do you properly motivate your kids. But I think as a parent, I've got to be excited about my kids' potential. I've got to be excited about their possibilities. As a child, they're trying to figure out their purpose, and they're trying to figure out their passion, and they may not think there's any possibilities. And so as a parent, I have to kind of carry that with them and communicate that with them. So let's go over those real quick. Simplify your message, see the person, show the truth, seek a response. Now, if you're, someone and you want to work on your communication, here's three things, three suggestions. Number one, be clear as a bell. So, look at an email you sent, or look at a letter you wrote. Did you get your message across? When you are communicating, your best friends are simplicity and clarity. You don't have to use a lot of big words, but how do you get your message across succinctly and sincerely? Be clear as a bell. Second thing, refocus your attention. When you're speaking, is your focus on you? Is it on what you're saying, or is it on your audience? Your focus when you're speaking needs to be on your audience, their needs, their questions, their desires. If you understand where your audience is and you meet them in the middle, great things are going to happen. Refocus your attention. And then last thing, live your message? Are there any discrepancies between what you communicate and what you do? It seems like regularly, unfortunately, there are stories of pastors who have fallen, pastors who say one thing in the pulpit and live another thing outside of church. And if you're a hypocrite to your kids, you're not going to be able to, have an impact. If you're a hypocrite to your kids and you're not getting through to them because they don't respect you because you're a hypocrite, that's when people lose their temper, and that's when bad things happen. Because you get frustrated. Because you're not willing to change. You're not willing to better yourself. You're not willing to make your walk line up with your talk. And so again, I've said it before. All of these qualities, they all are connected. You could have the best communicator in the world, but if they don't have character, it's going to fall apart. It is going to fall apart. You can't fake it, but for so long. And so, this podcast is about helping you be better. And so, no matter what you do, you're going to communicate with people daily. And it's frustrating when you feel like people don't understand you. It's frustrating when you feel like you're not being heard. And so I would encourage you, hit the pause button. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. How do you communicate with them? I'm got a meeting today where we're having a planning meeting. And there are some concepts that I'm trying to communicate to my team to help them understand how we can do our jobs better, to help them understand how we can, as a team, communicate better. And for us to communicate better as a team with the public, I got to help them understand. I got to communicate a message to them today that helps them see a big picture. I got to help them understand that. I think we're all in relationships sometimes where there's miscommunication, misunderstanding, and you always hear the old phrase, DTR, you got to define the relationship. That's all about communication. So you're going to be in a situation, whatever day you're listening to this, you're going to be in a situation where your ability to communicate clearly is going to be the difference between a good experience and a bad experience. And so take your time, take your deep breath, think about what you're going to say, think about how the other person's going to receive it, make it happen. It's as simple as that. So my prayer for you today is that maybe you got to have a hard conversation today. Maybe you got to have a conversation you've been putting off. And my prayer for you today is that God would give you the words. He would not only give you the words you need to say, He would grant you the spirit in which you need to say those words. I think that's such a big part of communication. Especially when you have to discipline someone or you have to come down on somebody. If you do it in a harsh and unloving way, it's not going to have the desired result. But if the person you're speaking to understands that you have their best interests in mind, and they truly see that you are trying to propel them to success and propel them to their achievements, again, that's when magic happens. That's when life kind of slows down for a moment and people kind of see the dots connect. So may God give you the words. May He give you the spirit to say those words. May He give you the results that you're seeking in that communication, in that conversation. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your continued support. I'm so excited for the future. I'm so excited that you've allowed me to come into your car or your headphones, wherever you're listening. I don't take that for granted. So God bless you, and we'll see you soon.